Well, if you've been with us the last several weeks, we are doing a kind of a survey study of the book of Joshua in the Old Testament. And if you haven't been with us, I'm going to tell you the same thing. We've been doing kind of a survey thing of the book of Joshua in the Old Testament. We're not going week by week, or not week by week. We're not going verse by verse, but I'm just kind of picking the highlights, or what I think may be the highlights of the book. Last week, we didn't get all the way through. We were talking about the story of a guy by the name of Caleb we find in the book of Joshua. We didn't get all the way through that story. Bill got us off on a sidetrack, and we just kept on that sidetrack for a long time. And he is back with us today, maybe going to sidetrack us again. Who knows? And I think, Mike, you helped with that too, if I remember right. But we're talking about this guy named Caleb in the book of Joshua and his faith in the God who promises and then keeps those promises. And we left off with Caleb. If you remember the story, Caleb this is back in the history of Israel, back before the Israel that we know now. Way back when, 3,000 years ago or a little more, 3,500 years ago, thereabouts, where the descendants of Abraham were first enslaved in Egypt. Then God allowed them or caused them to escape their slavery, promised them a land of their own. It took them 40 years to get to that land. They got in and made a nation of themselves. Well, during that time period between when they escaped from Egypt and the time they got in the land, their leader, Moses, sent 12 what we call spies into the land to see what it was like. And the 12 came back after a while, and they said, it's just a great land. It's fruitful. There's lots of vegetation. There's lots of stuff to eat. It's plentiful. It's just a great place. But the people there are well armored. They are well equipped with whatever they used in warfare. And we would never be able to fight them. We would never be able to defeat them. At least 10 of those 12 people did. 2 of the 12, a guy by the name of Caleb and a guy by the name of Joshua, said, nope, they may be tough, they may be strong, but with God's help, we can go in and we can take this land. He's promised this land to us. He's going to make sure we get it. Well, God didn't appreciate what the 10 had said, and so he swore on oath that he would, that none of those 10 and none of the generation that was current of that day would ever see the promised land. Only Caleb and Joshua out of all the people that were over the age of 20 would see that land. And that's where we are now. Caleb is one of the 2, Joshua's the other one, that went in with the younger generations, and they are in the process of fighting and defeating the people who are in the land now, and they are dispossessing those people. That sounds like kind of a gory thing, and it sounds like something that God wouldn't do, and there's lots of comment about that, and there's lots of thought about that, and we've talked about that a little bit in this class. Modern day, we think, oh man, would a loving God do that kind of thing? And we've talked about that. And so we'll not go into that again. But this is the story of Caleb going into that land, fighting for possession of the land, and asking that a specific promise that was made to Caleb be fulfilled. And that's where we're at now. We left off with Caleb asking Joshua for a particular part of that land to be given to him. Caleb was a member of the tribe of Judah, and so as a part of their inheritance, Caleb said, I want, God promised me this country over here. I want to take that. That's what I want. I want to recap just a little bit. We're going to read out of the book of Joshua here. This is what the book says. The text says, the word of the Lord. This is Caleb talking to Joshua now. Joshua's the leader. Caleb's the guy that's asking him for a particular piece of land.
What chapter?
I'm sorry?
What chapter?
I don't have that in my notes. Bill, what chapter?
14.
14? All I have is the text here. I don't have the numbers. You know the word of the Lord, which is how the verse starts out. You know the word which the Lord spoke to Moses, the man of God, concerning you and me. Here's Caleb talking to Joshua. Concerning you and me in Kadesh Barnea. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land. That was like with the other 11 people, the other 11 guys. And I brought word back to him as was in my heart. Nevertheless, my brethren who went up with me made the heart of the people melt with fear, but I followed the Lord my God fully. So Moses swore on that day, saying, surely the land on which your foot has trodden will be an inheritance to you and to your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God fully. Caleb continues to talk. Now behold, the Lord has let me live just as he spoke these 45 years. From the time that the Lord spoke this word to Moses, Moses is no longer around, when Israel walked in the wilderness, and now behold, I'm 85 years old today. Okay, we'll stop there for just a minute. If you look at the part of Caleb's speech where he says, so Moses swore on that day, saying, that's actually Moses there speaking the words of God. Deuteronomy 1:36 has this particular account. Beginning with verse 34 of Deuteronomy 1, you don't have to go back there. This is what Caleb's talking about. This is some 40 years before this. Then the Lord heard the sound of your words, and he was angry and took an oath, saying, this is Moses talking, not one of these men, this evil generation, shall see the good land which I swore to give your fathers, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. He shall see it, and to him and his sons I will give the land on which he has set foot, because he has followed the Lord fully. That's the promise that Moses spoke to Caleb. Moses spoke God's words. Caleb remembers that 40-some years later. He remembers what God said through Moses. So Caleb goes on in that passage to say that God has kept his promise to him and to his family. He has allowed Caleb to see the land, he and Joshua. He then starts into what for Caleb is maybe his most famous words, that his strength and his health are as good at 85 as it was at age 40. Listen to Caleb here. I am still as strong today as I was in the day Moses sent me. As my strength was then, so my strength is now for war and for going out and coming in. Now then, give me this hill country about which the Lord spoke on that day. For you heard on that day that the Anakim, and we'll talk about that, who those people were there with great fortified cities. Perhaps the Lord will be with me, and I will drive them out as the Lord has spoken. So Joshua blessed him and gave Hebron to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, for an inheritance. Hebron became the inheritance of Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, until this day, because he followed the Lord his God fully. I hadn't noticed until I studied this a week or so ago that part of this promise was, surely the land on which your foot has trodden will be an inheritance. 40 years ago, before this time, when Caleb went into the land that he walked on, the land that he saw, was the very same land that he asked Joshua for. And God promised to give it to him. Who were the people who were living in that land at the time he went in to spy out the land?
Giants.
That's what we call them. They were a race of people who, and I use that word race loosely, they were a race of people who, I don't know if they were really larger than normal, taller than normal. I don't know. Maybe they were stronger than normal. I don't know. But for some reason, this group of people that lived in this particular area provoked fear into the spies. We would never be able to take them, they said. They're too strong for us. They're too big for us. They're too mighty for us. Our army would never be able to do anything with this. Caleb and Joshua were the two that said, yeah, it is that way. These are, they have great armies, and they are a fierce people, and they are warriors. But we can do this. With God's help, we can do this. 45 years later, Caleb goes to Joshua, and he asks for this same piece of land on which these mighty people, these mighty warriors, whether they were taller, bigger, larger, who knows, than normal, we don't know. He asked for that very same piece of land where he said, we think we can do this. We think with God's help we can do this. And maybe you all knew that, but I didn't realize that until just this past week. That Caleb's asking for the same plot of ground that he saw 45 years ago, in which these people who provoked so much fear into the lives of the spies were living. This, to me, is faith in action. Not inaction, but in action. This is faith in action. This is a man who received a promise of God, taking God up on that promise, yet he still leaves God an opening. Did you notice that? He still leaves God an opening to work his will as he desires. Do you catch that phrase? Perhaps the Lord will be with me, and I will drive them out as the Lord has spoken. And that word perhaps is a fairly accurate translation of the Hebrew there. Perhaps the Lord will be with me, and I will drive them out as the Lord had spoken. Now, when you hear that, you think, well, Caleb is saying, well, maybe he will and maybe he won't, and maybe it's going to work out, maybe it won't work out. It might go okay, it might not go. That's not what this is all about. That word perhaps is not wishful thinking there. Nor is it a word that means maybe he will and maybe he won't fulfill his promise. It's a word that is claiming the promise. Caleb is claiming God's promise. But he leaves open the possibility that God may have plans for Caleb other than what Caleb has envisioned, but that would equally fulfill the promise. That makes sense? The promise is sure in Caleb's mind. He knows he's going to get that land. The method of carrying out that promise, what the fulfillment of that promise will look like, Caleb leaves up to God. Caleb says, I'm going to go in and I'm going to try to drive these people out, and I think God's going to be with me on this. But when he uses that word perhaps, what he's actually saying is, okay, those are my plans. I know I'm going to get the land in the end, but maybe God has other ideas. Maybe God doesn't want me to actually go in and fight these people. Maybe God is going to send a plague of some kind. Maybe God is going to frighten these people into leaving. Maybe God is going to, some other way, cleanse this land so I can go in. My plan is to go in and fight these people. But God may have other ideas. But whatever those ideas are and whatever those plans are, I know in the end I'm going to get this land. That's what that word perhaps means. He's leaving it open to God. He says, God, this is what I plan to do. And basically he's saying, let me know if that's not your plan. God, through Moses, promised Caleb that he and his sons would receive the land on which he had set foot. We've talked about that. That was the land that back then they said flowed with milk and honey, whatever that meant to them. This was the land that had strong and fortified cities. This was the land which was occupied by a people who seemed anyway like giants compared to the Israelite people. I mean, there are basketball players that seem like giants to me now.
Was this the tribe that Goliath came from? Or was he from a different?
I don't know. I'd have to look at that. I'm not sure, Norma, if that's the case or not. So that's kind of where Caleb is with this. And that's what Caleb is doing. He's claiming God's promise, but he's leaving it open to God as to how he's going to fulfill that promise. Caleb here is resting on God's promise to him through Moses and leaving the fulfillment entirely up to God, placing himself fully into God's hands. This, as I said earlier, is faith in action. God could have given Caleb that land any number of ways. Any number of ways. And that's what that word perhaps is all about. And the result of this faith in action, verse 14 of chapter 15, Caleb drove out from there the three sons of Anak, Sheshai and Ahiam and Talmai, the children of Anak, and then he went up from there against the inhabitants of Debir. So he did drive them out. That was God's plan, was to allow Caleb to drive these people out. Nothing is said about how God worked with Caleb to get that done. We don't know if Caleb had to fight fierce battles. We don't know we don't know how that all worked out. But the fact is that God and Caleb were successful in driving out the inhabitants of the land, however it was done. Okay, if you look at us in the modern day, we know what God's promises are. We also are a people who like to tell God just how to fulfill those promises, don't we? You never have done that, have you, Aileen?
Yes.
Oh, you have? I'm surprised at you. Why would you do such a thing? Unlike Caleb, who let God be God and do it his way, with Caleb being kind of the onlooker, so to speak, we like to have everything planned out down to the last detail, don't we? When we do that, we accomplish two things. Neither one of them are good. Number one, we put our own ideas and our own plans ahead of God. We think we know better than God how to carry out his promises to us. And number two, I think we box in God, not letting him work as he desires to work. And often our efforts fall short because we limit what God can do when we say, God, I want you to do this and I want you to do it this way. This is what I have in mind. This is how we need to do this.
And right now. And right now.
And right now. I think we box him in. I think we keep him from doing what he would like to do. Questions, comments?
There's a difference between telling God and asking God.
Okay, I'm sorry, Ann.
Difference between telling God and asking.
Yeah. And I think when Caleb said that word, perhaps, I think he was asking God. It doesn't really show that in the Hebrew, but I think he was asking God really there, okay, I'm claiming my promise here, and this is what I'd like to do, but you will do this however you want to. Yeah, I agree. Yes, sir.
I think we got to get into wishes and prayers. The government likes to wish for things, and the church likes to pray and ask for things out loud to trees or to other higher powers.
Okay, you're going to have to speak up, or Terry's going to have to tell me what you said.
The government likes to wish for things. We wish to the government for things. The government likes wishes. And church likes to pray for things or ask for things out loud, like the trees and stuff, or other higher powers.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes when we ask for things, we ask for certain things in a certain way, and that may not be what he has in mind. That may not be what God has in mind.
We need to follow it with thy will be done.
Yeah, I would agree. We need to remember that. We need to, we're not in charge of our lives. We're not in charge of ourselves. When we put ourselves in charge of ourselves, things get messed up. And it's messy enough the way it is. And I kind of agree with Eric, and I kind of agree with, was it Don? We're tired. I think we're all tired. I think Ann's tired right now. We're tired of COVID. We're tired of people getting sick. We're tired of people dying. We're tired of our loved ones having issues. We're tired of all of that. But to ask for, it's one thing to ask for healing. It's another thing to say, I want you to heal this person, and I want you to do it in this way. There's we don't know. We've got to give that over. We've got to give that over to God. First to say yes or no, and secondly, then if it's yes, okay, this is how God wants to do this. I'd like to back up a chapter. We were in chapter 14, Norma?
Yeah.
Okay, I want to back up a chapter. And
The last was 15.
was it 50? Okay. Okay, I want to back up to the actual division of the land. I think that's in 13. This can be something that's really boring to us. It can be something that's boring as watching grass grow. We have no stake in the inheritance. But for those that are inheriting the land back then, this is the culmination and the fulfillment of promises made years ago by God to their ancestors. This is another fulfillment of the promise. Caleb got his own fulfillment. This is a fulfillment to the people in general. But the first thing I want to do with this part of the chapter is to put together a couple of verses which are separated in the chapter itself. The first verse of the chapter are God talking to Joshua. I'm going to put verse 1 and verse 6 together. I'm going to eliminate 2, 3, 4, and 5. It says, Now Joshua was old and advanced in years when the Lord said to him, You are old and advanced in years, and very much of the land remains to be possessed. All the inhabitants of the hill country from Lebanon, as far as Misrephoth Maim, all the Sidonians, I will drive them out from before the sons of Israel. Only allot it to Israel for an inheritance as I have commanded you. Okay, that's God's command to Joshua. Joshua's old. I think he's no longer actively serving in the military. I think he's no longer actively working with the army. And I think God is telling Joshua, okay, it's time for you to give portions of the land to the various 12 tribes. God tells Joshua the truth about his age. You're old. You're old. God never was one to mince words, was he? He didn't use the word senior citizen. He didn't use, what are other terms for old people besides just old? Elderly.
All honey and deer.
He just says, you're old, Joshua. And then he takes several verses to delineate the land still to be cleansed. Then tells Joshua that he, God, would actually do the cleansing. It seems God's giving permission to Joshua here to stand down from active conquest and allot the lands to the tribes as God commanded him to do. Now, beginning in chapter 15 through chapter 21, the Bible gives a detailed listing of the land apportioned to each of the tribes, including the Levites who received the cities, some of the cities throughout the land. 15 through 21. This is the boring part of this book, because these chapters describe in great detail the allotment of the land and the allotment of the cities to each of the tribes and to the tribe of Levi. These are boring for us, but for Israel, as I said, this was a capstone of years of promises to their ancestors. Think about it. Think about it. If you would inherit 50 sections of prime Flint Hills grassland today, 50 sections of prime Flint Hills grassland. 640 acres to every section. Complete with homesteads, complete with towns, complete with utilities, complete with everything that was needed. All that goes with that. Wouldn't you want to know what the borders of that land were? Wouldn't you want to know? Wouldn't you want to go and see the land that you inherited? Or would you consider that to be a boring thing to do? If you put yourself in the position of these people back in Joshua, these chapters 15 through 21 are anything but boring. Let me tell you a story. Once, and this is not necessarily a true story, but it's modern day. Once upon a time, I'll use the words once upon a time. Once upon a time, there was a shop in a small town. And actually, we had these in the town where we lived, Harper, down southwest there. We had a couple of these kinds of shops where one could go and make a purchase. It was I don't know what kind of a shop it would be. It was a shop where you can make a purchase. It was a single proprietor shop. Often the store owner was in a back room handling incoming merchandise or is in his office doing bookwork, something like that. And often he would let customers, because he knew everybody in town, he'd let customers just kind of browse and select what they wanted to purchase. Then they would go to the cash register to check out. On the counter next to the cash register was a bell with a sign that said, "Ring bell for service." Sometimes someone would be ready to check out. They'd go over to the counter and they'd just wait there, never ringing the bell for service. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but did maybe they not want to bother the owner? Did they think the store owner would think they were being impatient or were being demanding somehow or another? Did they not understand that the owner put the bell there because he wanted them to ring the bell? I don't know if you've ever been in that position or not. I have. Ring bell for service. I don't want to make a lot of noise. I'll just stand here for a little while and see what happens. I've been there. God wanted Israel to ring his bell, so to speak. He promised the land to them. He made provision for the taking of the land. He provided leadership in the form of Moses and Joshua to lead the people to the land after they crossed the river. He constantly told the people that he would be with them. He constantly told them that he would drive out the inhabitants of the land. He delineated the boundaries of the land and each tribal inheritance in great detail. He's waiting for all of Israel to do what we see that Caleb has done. Act on God's promises. God is ready, willing, and able to bless and to give according to his word. Israel needed to act on that rather than to hold back in fear and in doubt. And that's a big part of what chapters 16 through 21 are all about. God says, I promised this to you. Here, this is the details of that promise. Here, you go take this. I'll be with you. I'll drive these people out from before you. Here, go over here. Asher, go over here. Zebulun, go up here. Judah, go down here. Manasseh, go over here. Levi, you have these cities. What about us, modern day? Coming back to modern day again. You don't need to look this up, but in Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 through 16, Norma, I did know this one. This is what the Hebrew writer says. Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast to our confession. For we do not have a high priest who's unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. This is the key verse, Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace that we may receive mercy and find grace and help in time of need. What does he say? Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of God. Jesus has done all of this for us. God has provided all of this for us. He wants us to draw near to him in confidence. Do we stand at the counter and just wait? Or do we ring the bell? By boldly and with confidence drawing near that throne so we can receive the grace and the mercy that God offers. Chapters on the division of the land. It's a prime example of people drawing near to receive the grace and the gift of the land that was long ago promised. Caleb being at the top of the list. These chapters are also a prime example of a people at times holding back in fear. There are places in these chapters where it says that they were not able to drive them out, or they did not drive them out, or they did not take all of the land that was given to them. Some did, some didn't. Just standing at the checkout counter, so to speak. Not wishing to ring the bell, not wanting to boldly ask, like Caleb did, for what already had been promised to him. Those times are when we read that Israel, as I said, did not fully drive out the inhabitants of the land, did not fully inherit the land. As Christians, I think we need, even those of us who are mature, those of us who, as God says, are old. I saw your hand. We need to learn to approach God with humility and reverence, but also with confidence that he indeed is going to fulfill his promise and give us grace and give us mercy. Comments, questions?
It's mercy. It's mercy.
I'm sorry?
It's mercy.
What is mercy?
It's not paying for ourselves.
What's mercy? Forgiveness. One is one definition of mercy. What's mercy? Let's keep going. We got a couple of minutes.
Unrequited love. Unrequited love.
Receiving something that you
You
don't
don't
deserve.
deserve.
Receiving something you don't deserve.
Right.
Yeah. And I know you've heard this before. You're in court and you're the defendant and the judge says you're guilty, but I'm not going to punish you. The judge gave mercy. The judge gave mercy. Different than grace. Grace are blessings that come unmerited. Grace is what God gives us that is unmerited. Mercy is we're guilty, but we're not being punished for it. Grace and mercy. Anything else? Comments, questions? Next week, we're going to go into a second altar. There was a second altar that was built. We're going to go into that story. And then we may take a couple of weeks for Joshua's farewell sermon or speech. He takes, I think, 3 chapters at the end and gives a speech to Israel. And he says a lot in there, and we may have to take a couple of weeks for that. You may have noticed in the bulletin that there are some brief outlines for what's coming up next in terms of adult classes. Urge you to go ahead and take a look at those. Julie will probably be in this room, and Curtis will probably be in the room over here. And both those classes, I think, are really going to be good. If you want to do both classes, and I put in that blurb in the bulletin, just pick one. And then if you don't know how to get on YouTube, learn how to get on YouTube and find the other one later on in the week once John and company have got them on there, and just take in the other class a little bit later on in the week. That's why we're taping these. That's why we're recording these, is because, I can't, I'm not going to say, okay, I got one good class and one boring and bad class. I'm not going to do that. I think both these classes are going to be just extra good. Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate it.